When the 5th gen Supra came out in 2019, there was mass outrage in the car community. And if you look at the sales trends, things aren't looking great for the Supra. But what's the big deal? Everybody loves the Supra.
Is that a Supra? Dude, is it a Supra?
Why is this new generation of the Supra being received so poorly by the car community? Well, everybody says pretty much the same thing. The Supra is not a Supra. The Supra is a BMW. But if you ask me, all those people are wrong. That's not the problem with the Supra. The problem with the Supra is, well, it's a Toyota. Let's talk about that. All right, I'm back. Yeah, boy. All right, so let's just get the elephant out of the room. What am I talking about? Well, for one, I think the Toyota Supra is a great car, and a lot of people would like it if they actually gave the car a chance. And secondly, I'm not saying that Toyota is a bad company. They make tons of great cars, and they make some absolutely legendary performance cars. So that's not the problem. I think the problem is how Toyota launched the Supra and how they marketed it, and that has ultimately tainted the perception of the Supra. So what exactly are you trying to say, Mr. Black YouTube guy? Wait, no, not that black YouTube guy. This black YouTube guy. So a whole tree down. Okay, I guess we're going this way. Basically what I'm trying to say is that the Supra has been out for almost 5 years now, so it's fair that we can do a little bit of a retrospective now. And when you look at how Toyota launched and then supported the Supra after launch, they really fumbled this product. The first way that I see that BMW fumbled the launch The first way that I see that Toyota fumbled the launch and the support of the Supra was from the very beginning. When the Supra came out in 2019, it was just way too expensive for what it was. The Supra came out in the spring, I believe, and its base price was $55,000. Now that may not have seemed too egregious, except for, well, in the fall, the C8 came out. And while the C8 is a lot more expensive now, its original base price was $59,000. Like, that's $4,000 more than a Supra. So that's just really hard to justify a car that had 335 horsepower when you could just pay $4,000 more, assuming you could avoid dealer markups, but you could pay $4,000 more on the MSRP and have a mid-engine car with 495 horsepower. It just didn't really make sense. The Supra was far too expensive for the market that it launched into. And if you want to compare the Supra to other BMWs, because everybody likes to tell you that the Supra is just a BMW, we will get to that, I promise. But if you look at other BMWs, I'm attempting to be run over. I don't know why they're driving on the sidewalk like this. The M240i was virtually the same exact price, except you could get it with xDrive and a manual transmission. And that kind of brings me to the second way in which I think that Toyota fumbled the launch of the Supra. There's no reason why the Supra did not launch with a manual transmission in 2019. Now, a lot of people might make the argument that Toyota added their IMT technology and that could have created a problem. But from my own personal experience and the research that I've done, that doesn't really hold up. The transmission in the Toyota Supra is a variant of the GS653BZ, which, if you guys have watched my channel, I actually have one sitting on my floor. BMW has used this transmission in just a ton of cars since 2006. So it's not an issue of maybe this transmission wasn't validated, maybe they didn't have data on it. BMW is well versed in how this transmission works, what the gear ratios are. BMW has thrown this transmission in everything from a 535i all the way up to the M5 with a V10. So I'm sure they have tons of data as to how this transmission works and performs. So I don't really understand how it would take 4 extra years to put a manual transmission on a platform that BMW has already validated everything on. And like I said, I'm not an engineer, but I did actually talk to some people who are in the industry. When the Supra launched in 2019, I was kind of blown away with how transparent BMW was about this whole Toyota collaboration. And if you were to ask the BMW engineers at an auto show any question about the Supra, they were actually very open about it. And I did just that. My initial question about the Supra was, will there be a manual transmission version? And the engineer that I talked to at the auto show said, that's up to Toyota. We tested it, we validated it, it exists, but it's up to Toyota to decide if that's something they want to offer. And even if you want to go beyond just, hearsay of just some random black guy walking around in the park with a GoPro, there's all these articles that came out of spy photos of the Supra being tested with a manual transmission. So clearly it was ready for a long time. So what was the holdup? I think a big reason why the Supra didn't launch with the transmission it very well should have launched with comes down to Toyota's sinister marketing plans. Now, off the top of my head, I can't tell you who said this, but I will try to look for a quote and validate this. I've talked to more than a few people who have said all kind of the same thing, including Toyota dealerships, that Toyota's plan for the Supra was that they wanted to bring a major update to the car every single year that the Supra is out. And for a sports car and for a car marketed towards car enthusiasts, that's just a really bad idea. Now, I'm not saying that cars can't be updated over their lifespan. In fact, what we'll do is we'll make a little bit of a comparison to the car that launched alongside the Supra. Like I said, the Supra came out in the spring, and then in the fall, the C8 came out. If you look at how GM handled the C8, it's completely different than how Toyota brought updates to the Supra. But when GM launched the C8, they did it in a way where they brought new powertrains to the car that justified them not being out at launch. The E-Ray, while it does share an engine with the Stingray, is a substantially different car than the Stingray, simply because of its whole electric drive situation. It's a completely new powertrain that didn't exist anywhere besides in the Porsche 918 before that. So it kind of made sense why they didn't launch that at launch. Same thing with the Z06. That was a completely new engine that GM had never created anything like that before. So again, it made sense that it wasn't there at launch. And the ZR1, good Lord. We're gonna have to talk about that thing. The ZR1 is just bananas. I have no idea what they're doing over there in Detroit, but like the ZR1, all right, back on track. We're not really here to talk about the ZR1, but we will make an actual episode talking about the ZR1 because it needs to be talked about. Now, if you compare that to what Toyota did, what Toyota did felt very disingenuous. And what I mean by that is when the Toyota Supra launched, it launched with 335 horsepower. And then about a year and a half into its life cycle, it got a big horsepower bump. It was almost 50 horsepower. And pretty much everybody who was an early adopter of the Supra felt super slighted. Now, why is that the case? Well, if you actually are deep in BMW lore, you will understand what Toyota did was kind of scummy. When the Supra launched, it had a B58, and well, now it still has a B58. So you're thinking, what's the deal? Well, when Toyota selected the engine for the original Supra, it was a variant of the B58 called the B58C. That engine is shared with the X5. And then a year and a half later, Toyota brought updates to the car. But what they really did was just swap the X5's B58 for the Z4's B58. The Z4 and the Supra are allegedly the same car. It almost feels like Toyota needed to justify a brand new version of the car coming out a year and a half later. Now, why would Toyota do that? There's no clear answer from Toyota, but me being the skeptic and the cynic that I am, this is my viewpoint. I think what Toyota wanted to do was launch the Supra, and then according to the rumors I've heard from dealers themselves, the way that they were going to bring an update a year into the launch of the Supra. Thanks. Yep. And then the way that Toyota was going to bring an update to the Supra a year to a year and a half into its life cycle was to give it a new engine. So basically give this perception of, oh, the Supra is great, it's amazing, but people say it needs more horsepower. Well, we're gonna get back into the lab and boom, and now it's got 50 more horsepower. When in reality, they just gave it the engine it was supposed to have in the first place. That's kind of scummy. But that's why I say the biggest problem with the Supra isn't the heritage or the fact that BMW is there, but it's Toyota's management decisions for the launch of this car. It's one thing to incrementally bring updates to a car. GM has just given us a masterclass as to how to develop a platform over its lifespan. But the Toyota Supra, they've also given us a masterclass, but it's almost kind of a masterclass on how to fleece your customers. The reason why to me it feels scummy is when you look at all the updates that have come to the Supra, almost none of them can be justified in a way where you could say, okay, I understand why that didn't come at launch. Almost everything could have just been there in 2019. And then if you wanted to bring a big substantial change to the Supra, give it a S58. They could have waited 2.5 years into the M3, or the M3. They could have waited 2.5 years into the Supra's life cycle and then gave it the M3's drivetrain. That would have been way better than what Toyota chose to do. And then finally, as promised, the BMW elephant in the room. Yes, there are issues with the way that this car was developed with BMW. I don't see working with BMW as a bad thing, but I'm a guy wearing a t-shirt with an E36 on it and I have 3 BMWs. What I see as the real problem is if you look at how the BRZ was developed. The BRZ and Subaru was a true collaboration. Yes, it has a Subaru engine, but then Toyota added their injection system on top of it. It is a Subaru chassis, but then Toyota made it rear-wheel drive and added their transmission. It has a Aisin 6-speed, which is a company owned by Toyota. Now, if you look at the Supra, Toyota did have some input in how the B58 was designed and refined, but in my opinion, is not enough to be called a true Toyota. Now, the Toyota in its chassis tuning and the way it drives is very much a Toyota. Like Elbon said in his video, I do believe it's a Toyota sports car, but they could have gone a little bit farther. And so because there was no very apparent Toyota influence on the car, people felt like they were just going to a Toyota dealership to buy a BMW. When in reality, the Supra actually is much more than that, but the problem is that Toyota didn't go far enough as to influencing the creative direction and the engineering direction of the B58. And so if you looked at the Subaru Boxers and the Toyota Boxer or the Boxer that was in the BRZ, there was actually a difference because for a long while, the only way to get port injection on a Subaru Boxer or port and direct injection was on the Toyota version, which made sense. It was their technology that they added on Subaru's engine. It was the perfect example of a collaboration. The B58 that is in the Toyota Supra doesn't feel like that. In fact, most things that are in the Supra don't feel like that. Now, Toyota did do a lot of engineering resources on the Supra and the engine itself. Now, I think what could have really helped is if the Supra had launched in 2019 and it had some version of Toyota's marquee technologies only available on the Supra and the Z4, but no other BMWs, that would have completely changed people's perspective. Even if they could have did just like they did on the F820 and bring port injection to the B58 in 2019 instead of, well, I think B58 just got port injection this year, but if the Toyotas had had it way back then, that would make it clearly apparent to people that Toyota, they didn't just rebadge a BMW. So with all of that said, how do I feel about the Supra? I really want one. I think the Supra is a great car, and like I said before, BMW would not have built something like the Supra. I think it's the best BMW that's on sale right now, and I know everybody's gonna lose their mind and say that the M3 exists, but best in my opinion does not mean just the fastest. If you're looking for something that is truly rear-wheel drive, has a 6-speed manual, is the perfect footprint. I love the size of the Supra. It reminds me a lot of the 1M and the E46 M3. It's a very small car compared to the M4, which has gotten huge. I think when you consider all of those things, it's a pretty amazing car. But the problem is Toyota. And not even Toyota's engineering department. Those guys are geniuses over there. It's their marketing department. I have issues with Toyota's marketing department and their management department who decided to launch the Supra in this way. And all right, I think that's all I have to say about that. Now, if you disagree with me, cool, because like I'm not like the authority on Supras or on anything really. I'm just a dude. But if you liked what I had to say, disliked what I had to say, jump into the comments. Like, let's actually have a conversation about this, because I think the Supra is polarizing, and I think it's something worth having a civilized conversation about. So jump down in the comments. If you look at my previous videos, you know I'm literally always there. I respond to most comments, unless you're not actually saying anything substantial like that guy who commented period on my video. But okay, but for the most part, if you comment something, I will usually comment back, and let's have a conversation about it. And I will see you guys in the next one.
The download is complete.